Hey everyone, welcome. If you can hear me, would you just let me know in the chat box? Awesome. Hello. Hi. Thanks for coming. I'm so excited you're here. We're going to get started in just a minute, but I wanted to welcome you and also let you know that I would love it if you'd share with us, where you're from, what grade you teach. Just go ahead and type that into the chat box. Just a couple of little tech tips. Maggie, I'm happy you're here too. Thanks for coming. A couple of little tech tips. Google Chrome is what they recommend. You can always press the refresh button. You can use the reconnect button. You can also rejoin through the email should there be any technical difficulties tonight. Fingers crossed it's all smooth sailing, but just wanted to let you know about that. Susan in Naperville. Hey, Susan. Andrea in Chicago. Mandy, Christine. Some people are not able to hear, so just double check your speakers. Typing a little message in for those people. Sometimes there is a lag too, so for whatever reason, it might take a few minutes to pick it up. Welcome, Stephanie, Gail, instructor of pre-service teachers. That's awesome. Danielle, welcome. Margaret, welcome. Lisa, Judy, homeschool. That's wonderful. Lizzie, Letitia, welcome. Elaine, Karen, Elizabeth, Caitlin, Karen. Looks like we've got teachers all over. So exciting to have you here. Mary, welcome. Cheryl, Patricia, Amy. All right. I do want to go ahead and dive in because it's 2 minutes after the hour. Thank you again so much for being here. I'm excited to share with you about revising and editing instructional strategies for those. This is actually, I think, one of my favorite presentations that I give. This is something that's near and dear to my heart because it's something that I've struggled with for a long time, getting my kids to recognize their own mistakes in their writing and begin to fix them, begin to improve their writing at, of course, the kinder, first, and second grade appropriate level. So I'm really excited to share some strategies that have worked for me, and I hope that you have some takeaways that you can use in your own classroom even tomorrow if you find something good. So I'm going to go ahead and switch over to my slides now. You should see the first slide of my presentation. We're going to go ahead and get going. A couple of housekeeping items though. There is a short delay, so whatever you're hearing me say now, I actually said like 20 seconds ago. Just keep that in mind with the chat box. Speaking of the chat box, if you've been on a workshop with me before, you know that I love it when you chat, ask questions, answer each other's questions, share your own ideas. It's so nice that we can all be here and learn from each other. For me, the comment box sometimes will scroll quickly and I will miss things, but I'll stop periodically, go back, pick up questions where I can, and then at the end, I answer as many questions as possible. I want to grab pencil and paper to take some notes. There will be stuff in the freebie afterward, and I'll kind of let you know if there's like a long list of something that you don't need to write down, but you may want to have paper and pencil handy. And then before I give any presentation, I always say this. I'm sharing what I've learned as a classroom teacher and also as a literacy specialist. Ultimately, I understand that your school, your district might have different requirements from what I'm sharing here. And of course, you have to do what you feel is best for the kids in front of you because we're all in unique situations and we have to do what's best for those babies. So keeping that in mind. Let's see. I'm going to go ahead and put the tech help box up. If you are having issues, probably the best thing to do is try a different browser, and you can even go back, just exit out of this. You can always get back and then just rejoin to try to reset things. So I'll just type that in the chat box for anybody who's having issues. Okay. So if you've been on a workshop with me before, welcome back. I'm so glad you enjoyed it enough to come back for more. If we aren't acquainted yet, my name is Allison. I'm a literacy specialist with a focus on K2. My classroom teaching experience is also mostly K-2. So I did teach pre-K teaching. I'm actually working with pre-K this year, but it was my very first year teaching that I taught pre-K in the public schools. I taught kindergarten for several years, taught first and second, and then multiple years ago became a literacy specialist. So that's kind of where I've been. I moved pretty recently from the Chicago area, and now we live a little bit south of Nashville. Love the city. This is my husband, Jonathan, and we have 2 little fur babies, Max and Lindsay. So we are in our new home and enjoying it. And yeah, so that's me. So I do like to get to know you as much as possible too. So what I would love for you to do right now is rate how your students do or how they're doing so far this year when it comes to revising and editing. Would you say that 1, they are just not there yet, or 3, things are going, smoothly and as expected and you're really happy with their progress? Go ahead and type in your number 1, 2, or 3 into the chat box. See lots of 1s. On Monday, there were a lot of 1s too. And I feel like especially at this time of year, especially with kinder, they're just kind of even starting to write. So obviously they're not going to be revising and editing yet. What I hope though is that as the year goes on, you'll be able to use a lot of these strategies that I'm going to share tonight, as they grow as writers. This is not just stuff that you can cover in a week and move on from. What I hope is that you can use this stuff all year long. So I do see a lot of 1s, 2s, mix of 1 and 3, 2 and 3. Yeah. Okay. So if you're at a 1, again, I hope that tonight will help you feel more prepared to teach revising and editing, both now, but also throughout the school year. If you're at a 3 and your kids are rolling and doing well, that's awesome. I still hope that you will walk away with some new ideas just to keep your kids engaged in and excited about revising and editing this school year. So here's what we're going to be talking about today. We'll start briefly by just talking about the stages in the writing process and what the writing process really is. We'll kind of look at it in a way that you might not have thought about before. I'm going to touch very briefly on what the Common Core standards have to say about revising and editing. Common Core is what I was using when I was teaching in Illinois before we moved. And so even if you don't use Common Core, my hope is that by kind of going over this with you, you will get some ideas for looking at your own standards and thinking about your own standards, whatever they may be. I'll talk about, what do we want kids to do when we're getting them to revise, some research-based best practices for teaching revision, and kind of the same thing with editing. What do we want our kids to do? And then how can we get them to do it when it comes to editing? This second to last part here. So this is when we're going to talk about how you can really take revising and editing and make it a part of your daily routine. And I'm going to share during this part a little bit of information about a revising and editing table that I began. I forget when it was a number of years ago, but maybe like 5, 6 years ago that I started doing this, but it was a total game changer for me. So I'm really excited to share that with you. It made a big difference for my kids. And then, whoops, got a little too excited there. The last part here, I'm going to share some information with you about resources that I've developed for teaching, revising, and editing. And we're doing a big giveaway tonight. Usually when I do a giveaway, it's you get one thing, but tonight the winners are going to be getting 3 different things. So you definitely want to stick around. You got to be here live in order to win. So definitely make sure to stay to the end. Also at the end, I'm going to be sharing the freebie that everyone's going to get. Throughout tonight, I will stop and answer, a question or 2, but then at the end, I will additionally try to stay and answer as many questions as I can. Okay, so I know some people are having tech problems, and I'm so sorry for that. It honestly has a lot to do with internet on your end. I don't know if there are some major service providers having issues. So sorry about that. I just put the tech help tips up again. Okay, so I've done some previous workshops on the writing workshop approach. I'm not going to go too far in depth here, but I just want to give you a little bit of context. I just want you to understand, if you haven't been on a workshop with me, how I teach writing on a daily basis. So I use the writing workshop approach. I teach in units that are structured around different genres like informational writing or personal narratives. And all of the kids are writing in that genre during the unit, but they're working on their own projects. So, for example, we're doing personal narratives, and the kids, one child's writing about when I, broke my arm, another child's writing about when I went on vacation. So they're all working in that genre, but they're choosing their own topics and they're working at their own pace. There's a good amount of choice in the workshop model that I use. So every day our workshop consists of the 3 parts shown in this little pie chart. We've got a mini lesson, which is about 10 minutes. The kids write for as long as possible. Then following that, depending on what your schedule is like, that's going to differ. It could be, maybe 20 minutes, 30 minutes. And then we wrap up with a sharing time at the end that's about 5 minutes. So even if you don't teach writing exactly like this, even if you use something slightly different, the strategies that we're going to talk about today, they're definitely still going to apply to you. I just kind of want to help you understand where I'm coming from, but know that you can use, the freebies and the ideas here, no matter what approach or, overall take you use with writing. Okay, so we typically teach kids that writing is a process, right? We want them to understand that it's not a one and done kind of thing. We want them to know that writers go through different stages during the development of a piece of writing. And these are usually the stages that we teach kids, or something very similar. So first, the author plans or does pre-writing, and then comes drafting, revising, editing, and then publishing. So that's what we usually teach, right? But this is the reality. Proficient adult writers revise frequently both during writing and after completing a draft. So to make this really concrete, I'd like you to think about the simple task of just writing an email, maybe an email to a parent, an email to your principal, an email where you're gonna, make sure that you're wording things carefully and, something that you care about sending, right? So when you write that email, you're not necessarily gonna sit there, plan it out, type it all out at once, and only then go back and reword things and, fix typos and whatever. You're not necessarily gonna do it exactly like this, right? Because if you think about writing an email, maybe you'll be like, okay, what am I going to write? And then you'll type out a couple of sentences. As you're typing, you're probably going to reword things, fix mistakes. Maybe you'll write 3 sentences and then go back and read them again, right? And then you'll write a couple of more sentences, go back, fix anything, and you'll kind of go through the email like that. Maybe you'll, read it once more before you send it, and then you're done. So that's something that you probably don't even think about doing, right? You automatically sit down and go through these different stages more than once, even when you're just writing a small little email. Because in reality, the writing process, it's not linear like this. As a proficient adult writers, we don't do things in this order necessarily. Writing is actually a recursive process. So, we go through a stage. We think about a couple of sentences for the email. We draft the sentences. We revise, we edit, and then we go back to planning the next couple of sentences or a different part of the email, right? So this nature of the writing process is part of what makes teaching, revising, and editing so tricky. It's a complicated process, right? And I'm not necessarily saying that kinders, first and second graders, they don't necessarily need to fully understand the complexities of it yet, right? But if we, as their teachers, if we're aware of what the writing process really is, that it's more like this than this, then when we are modeling things for our kids, we can show them, we don't necessarily have to go through these stages like this. We can edit mid-draft, right? That's okay. We can model the true nature of it, the fact that it's recursive. We can teach them. I still teach kids that these are the stages in the writing process. But when I'm modeling things, I really try to reflect the fact that the whole time I'm writing, I'm editing, I'm revising, and it's more of a cyclical process than just these 5, concrete steps in a row. So I mentioned before that I wanted to talk briefly about the Common Core standards. Even if you don't use the CCSS, it's not necessarily the standards that I want to show you as much as a way of looking at and thinking about your own standards. So the Common Core standards, and maybe yours too, whatever you use, they do support teaching writing as a process. And in the Common Core, Anchor Standard 5, Writing Standard 5 that is, says develop and strengthen writing as needed by planning, revising, editing, rewriting, or trying a new approach. And so this is what we want our kids to be able to do when they walk out of 12th grade, right? So then what the Common Core standards do is they take that ultimate goal and they break it down into what does that look like at a kindergarten level? What does that look like at a first grade, a second grade, a third grade level? So it all kind of builds from there. So in your freebie, you're going to get the progression that the Common Core does use for K first, second, and I also did third because I know that, a lot of us are K2 teachers, but my point here, regardless of what standards you use, I like to look at, yes, the standard for my grade level, but also the standard below it and above it. So I kind of get a sense of, okay, like, where are my kids supposed to be when they come to me for the school year? Where might I need to fill in some gaps? Then I also kind of want to see, well, where are they going next year? So just looking at the Common Core real quick, the kindergarten standard requires us to teach kids to respond to questions and suggestions from their peers, add details to their writing with teacher support. That's an important part. At the beginning I said, what I'm sharing tonight, your kinders, if your school year is anything like mine, we're kind of just getting rolling, right? Like if we can write some letters and some strings of letters based on sounds, like that's good for some of us anyway. So obviously this is kind of on down the line. These are just things to keep in mind as you go through the school year. The first grade standard is pretty similar, but as you can see in the blue text that I kind of highlighted here, they added that kids need to get help with focusing on a topic in first grade. And then the second grade standard mentions revising and editing for the first time. And so, to me, the way I interpret that is in second grade, when I'm teaching second, I kind of begin to expect them to put words to the different stages in the writing process and understand a little bit better the different stages. That's just my interpretation of it. And then the third grade standard explains that kids need to get help from their peers and adults during the planning or developing stage. So not just after they write, but before they write too. So they're getting really help throughout the planning. They draft and then help with revising and editing. Let's see if I missed a question. Teresa, good. I'm glad that's helpful. Good, Cindy. Okay, not seeing any questions. If you have one, feel free to type it in and I'll come back to it for sure. So now what I want to do is I want to spend some time talking about what it means to teach revising, right? Like what does that look like at a K2 level, so to speak? And then what does the research say? And then what are some research-based best practices to get our students to revise more independently or revise at all? So these are the things we want our students to consider when they're revising. When we're thinking about revising, we're really thinking about the content. We're not worried about those little, mistakes, capitalization, punctuation. Those are important, but those are really more of editing issues, right? So for this reason, even though, as I said with the example before in the email, as adult writers, we're constantly revising and editing, I kind of like to break them apart for kids just because it's easier for kids to worry about like missing periods, capital letters, misspelled words. It's a whole other thing to get them to really rethink their writing, right? Revise means the word part re means to do again, right? And vise comes from, I don't know what word it is, but like view or review. So we want the kids to view their writing with different eyes, which is hard. But so when we're thinking about getting them to revise, we want them to consider things like their purpose. So are they trying to convince the reader of something? Maybe they wrote an opinion piece. Did they accomplish that? That's something we want them to think about. We want them to think about their audience. Did they meet the needs of the reader? If it's an informational text, did they provide all of the information necessary for someone who doesn't know anything about the topic? Then there's organization. At a basic level, with kindergarten, we're starting to write stories. And when we finish, we look it over. Do we have a beginning, middle, and end? Are they in order? If it's a nonfiction book, did the kids, divide up their books into little sections? Maybe they have headings. That's organization too. When it comes to word choice, did they use interesting words? That's something we can get into maybe first, second grade, even kinder at the end of the year, because you can talk about things like, well, in nonfiction, you wrote a book about elephants. Did you use words like tusk, those specific vocabulary words? And then eventually we want them also to think about sentence structure. So did they write and complete sentences just at the basic level? Are their sentences varied in length, or are they all the same length? Do their sentences flow well? Do their sentences go on and on and on forever like some kids tend to do? These are all things that we want to think about when we're getting our kids to revise, or get them to think about rather. Yes, Lori, that's exactly the word I was looking for. So Lori said revise. I think of it as revisit. Yeah, so totally revisiting the work, viewing it with new eyes. Absolutely. So these are 3 best practices for teaching revising. These have been identified by research, and I got these from Best Practices in Writing Instruction, which is a great book if you're interested. There's a new version since I read it, but it's a good one. So the research says that we've got to give kids specific criteria so they know what they should be looking for when they revise. We need to teach them strategies through the gradual release of responsibility. And then we also want them to peer revise. That's very effective, even with the little ones. But when we do use peer revising, we still need them to do these 2 things. We've still got to teach them this first before they can truly be successful with peer revising. Rubrics or checklists are great ways to provide our kids with specific criteria. They need to know what they should be working toward. They need to know what the end goal is so that they can fix up their writing, right? And rubrics are great. Sometimes it can be a lot of text, right? So this is a first grade example. I believe I included this, excuse me, in your freebie, but so whether you do like smiley faces, or if you prefer something like stars, 1 star, 2 stars, 3 stars, or whether you do numbers, it's helpful to have a visual. A lot of times in some of the resources that pretty much all the resources I've created that are in my TPT store, I include also a visual for these little parts of the rubric. The visuals are just really helpful because it tends to be a lot of text for kids. It can be overwhelming. One thing also that helps is, like, you see this is a grid the way it's set up. You can actually take, oops, my mouse isn't cooperating. So you can actually take scissors and physically cut apart the rubric. You could do it strip by strip, or you could just do a chunk of it, right? You can break up whatever rubric you have and take it down into smaller chunks that are more like bite-sized for kids, because to present all of this to them at once is a lot, especially if, a lot of us that are toward the beginning of our school year. So when we introduce rubrics for the first time, it can be really helpful just to present one part at a time before we, throw the whole thing at them. Okay, so when we're using rubrics, they're great, but we have to model and explicitly teach our kids how to use them. We can't just read them the items and be done with it, which now that I'm thinking about it, I'm pretty sure I did when I was student teaching. I forgot that I had done that, but it's like coming back to me. And now I remember we had to use a rubric or something, and they did this project. I'm pretty sure all that I did was read it to them, but that just wasn't sufficient, right? We have to model, we have to think aloud for our kids. And like I said, we might want to take the rubric apart, physically cut it apart. That can be helpful too. Now I'm going to just walk you through one little example of what I might say to my students when I'm modeling how to use a rubric. So let's imagine, we're working on a how-to writing unit. Again, that's from a first grade unit, I believe. And we are focusing on just this one part of the rubric. I just took this and I cropped it out of this. So it's just the top line and that's it, right? That might be something that we do with our kids. So what I did is I created a writing sample, and I found that it's very helpful when I'm teaching revising and editing to pre-create a sample that the kids can then help me, or I can model how I would revise and edit it. So I've got this how-to writing sample. I'm going to put it up on the board. Ideally, they would be able to see both pages at once. Smartboard is good for this. But so the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to read it aloud to the kids. So just in case the screen is blurry for you, I am going to read it out loud to you. So what the piece of writing says is, first, you need to squeeze a little toothpaste under your toothbrush. Don't use too much. Next, put the toothbrush in your mouth. Start brushing your teeth. Make little circles with your brush. When you are done, spit out the toothpaste in the sink. Rinse your mouth out with some water and clean your brush too. Now you are done brushing your teeth. So next what I do is I model how we would rate this, sample little writing piece, right? So I would say something like, okay, now boys and girls, I'm going to use the rubric to figure out how we might make this writing better. So I look at the rubric just one row at a time. And at this point I display, either just this strip under the document camera, or I'd have it up here. Or what you can do is you can take the whole rubric, you can use color highlighting or just cover up the rest, but you really want kids to visually focus on reading the rubric across. Because if you just look at this and you're 6 years old, this doesn't make any sense, right? So you want them to focus on reading across. That's something they have to learn. So the first row says, boys and girls, does my book use 3 or more steps to teach the reader how to do something? Does it not have steps that teach? Does it have 1 or 2 steps? Or does it have 3 steps, right? So I ask myself, which one of these choices is true for this piece of writing? We got to go back and we got to count the steps, right? So here it says, first you need to squeeze a little toothpaste onto your toothbrush. That's 1 step. Next, put the toothbrush in your mouth. That's a 2nd step. And then we have start brushing your teeth. When you are done, spit out the toothpaste, rinse your mouth out. So we have more than 3 steps actually. So I would circle the part on the rubric that says, yes, 3 steps. So that in a nutshell is just kind of what I would do with them. This that I just did is modeling for only one part of the rubric. And so if they're not familiar with rubrics, that might be all we do that day. And maybe after I do this modeling, I give them their own little strips from the same, the rubric, the same little strip. And I say, okay, now I want you to go back, maybe with a partner or by themselves. I have them look at their own piece of writing and ask themselves the same thing. Are there 3 or more steps? So then, maybe the next day we come back and I do 2 more steps on the rubric, or 2 more strips, 3 more strips, right? However many I feel like my kids can handle. And obviously we don't have time for a snail's pace for every single rubric that I give them. But if you do this at the beginning of the year, when you're teaching them how to use a rubric, it can be super helpful. Or if you're in a new genre, you might want to break it down like that too. So that's kind of how I would do part of the rubric, and I would continue either in that lesson or on future days to do the other rows in the rubric just like that. So along with that too, before I move on, when I'm using the rubric, with this particular strip, there was no revising to be done. If I'm introducing part of the rubric where I have intentionally left something to be desired, I need to revise in some way, then I will model that when I teach them that part of the rubric. Just a little side note there. One other thing you might want to consider is giving different kids different rubrics or checklists. And I don't mean that every kid in your class is going to have a different rubric. Like, we don't have time for that. But maybe would you consider, you have a more challenging rubric for your higher kids so that they don't end up looking at the rubric and feeling like, oh, well, I've got that. I'm done. I don't need to try any harder. That's not what we want, right? Or maybe you have a group of low kids, and your low kids, it's not that you're going to expect less from them, but when you give them the rubric that has all these things on it that are so out of reach, that's overwhelming. That's not productive for them. So maybe for a small group of kids, you give them half of the rubric, or you give them just a little bit of a modified rubric, just something to think about. At the end of the presentation, I will show you some leveled rubrics and checklists that I've created. Okay, so at the beginning, or not the beginning, but when I was talking about the list of revising strategies that are research-based, one of them was to teach students to revise using the gradual release of responsibility. And a lot of us are probably familiar with this concept, whether we call it that or something different. But basically, it just means that we're working our students toward being able to use a revising strategy independently by giving them more of the work little by little. So what that looks like in practice is we explain the strategy, we model, we provide think alouds. So maybe you've got like a sample piece like I was talking about before, and you're showing the kids, hey, I'm gonna, change the order of these different parts, or I need to add something in because I left something out that the reader needs to know, right? You're explaining what you're doing, you're showing them. It's great if it's a piece that you've written, maybe even in front of them, and then you come back and you show them how you make it even better. So that's kind of this part, right? And then eventually you get to guided practice. And so that can look different, and you can and should model, or not model, but you can and should incorporate different types of guided practice when you're teaching a revision strategy. So for example, this could look like I've got something up on chart paper and the kids help me revise, right? Like I try to get them to take more of the lead. It could look like this. They are working on their own pieces, or maybe a sample piece that I've given them, and I'm providing support, and maybe they're working with partners to also get support. That's also guided practice. Honestly, a lot of guided practice at this age too takes place in those one-on-one conferences. I try to spend, I do pull small groups during workshop, but I also try to spend some time meeting with kids one-on-one, because it's really helpful, not for me to sit down and tell them how to change their work, but for me to kind of help them think through it, because it is such a tricky thing to do. We're teaching revision at this age. So the guided practice can also be one-on-one or in small groups, like I mentioned. And then, of course, ultimately, we want our kids to be able to automatically apply whatever we're teaching them on their own. So if we're teaching them, for example, this is how when you're revising, you can choose more interesting words, right? We want them to be able to do that eventually on their own. For my kinder, my first grade teacher friends, this may not be something that we see for most of the year, or, till the very end of the year, but we've got to work in that direction. We have to at least model and give them experiences with it, so that eventually when they get to, late first grade, second grade, third grade, that they are ready, they have that foundation, and they're familiar with the revising process, even if we're giving them a lot of support at this stage in the game, so to speak. And when we're using that gradual release model, repetition is key, right? So it's not like, I feel like sometimes, I don't know if it's some admin or I've heard this idea of like, okay, well, in one lesson, I guess it comes from, so in some ways that I've been evaluated, you had to model a skill in a lesson, and then in that same lesson, you have guided practice, and then you have independent practice, and it all happens in one lesson. And for some things, that's true, right? But with something complex like revising, repetition is so key. I wouldn't model a strategy and expect my kids really to be able to apply it on their own, right? I might model for a day, do some guided practice another day, maybe some more guided practice, and then eventually they do some on their own. And the other thing too is you may have to go back to modeling a strategy. Maybe you were modeled at the beginning of the year, but some kids weren't ready for it quite yet. So you come back to it in the middle of the year, and then you come back to it toward the end. I've just found that kids tend to be developmentally ready to absorb and learn strategies at different times in the year. So that's why repetition is so key. The other thing about repetition is, you're thinking out loud. You're showing them, this is what I'm saying to myself in my head as I revise. So the more they hear that kind of stuff, the more the words that you're saying become the words that they're saying to themselves in their own heads as they start to learn how to revise their own work. So I was talking about, just one revision strategy and teaching it using this, right? I wasn't talking about how to revise a piece of writing in a million ways. I was talking about one strategy. And the reason why I just tackle one revision strategy is at a time is because, in reality, eventually they have to be able to look at a piece of writing and, choose stronger words, add in more details, rearrange parts of the story. But with kids just at the primary level, at least in the beginning, I found it so much more helpful if I only teach one revision strategy at a time, or I only introduce one at a time. So when I'm planning a writing unit, I will kind of schedule in and plan for revision mini lessons every so often. I am modeling writing in front of them, right? We're working on personal narratives, and I'm actually writing a personal narrative, not all in one day, but different pieces as time goes on. And when that piece is more or less finished, then I'll model how I revise, and I'll teach them, okay, here is with a nonfiction book, right? Let's say I wrote a nonfiction book. One way you can revise is by checking to make sure the information that goes together is on the same page. So I wrote a book about giraffes, all the info about what giraffes eats on one page, all the info about where they live on a different page, stuff like that, right? That's one revision strategy. Another example, let's say we wrote an opinion piece, right? One lesson on revising might be, here's how you revise your opinion piece by adding in transition or linking words. And that's one lesson, right? So once I model that, once they maybe practice with me, I do ask them to take out one of their own writing pieces and with my help or with a partner's help to practice what I just showed them. Whether that's same day or a different day, it just kind of depends how complex it is. And that's how I do it though, right? I model it. I try to get them to apply it to their own writing, right? So it's more meaningful. And that's all we do, just one revision strategy at a time. At the end of my units, you'll notice if you use my first or second grade units, we do circle back. I do encourage them at the end to think about different revising strategies that we've talked about and kind of, tackle more than one at once. But as we're going through the unit, I do tend to teach just one revision strategy at a time to keep things simple. And then in your freebie, you're going to find a list of suggestions for these type of revision strategy lessons. So I think what I did is I broke it down by genre. If you're teaching narrative, here are some different ideas for revision strategies that apply to narrative or opinion or informational writing. So thinking back to that slide I had of best practices for teaching revision, at the bottom, it said something about peer revising, right? And that it was effective only when it was combined with giving the kids clear criteria, aka rubrics, and strategy instruction through the gradual release model. So peer revising is really powerful. It's really worked with my kids. Just as an adult writer, we may write something and think it's fine, look it over, and then somebody else looks at it and immediately finds an error, right? We become blind to our own mistakes, and so do kids. So that's why this is so powerful. Even with our little ones, they can help each other find mistakes. But before we start asking them to do that, we need to have modeled them some strategies, right? They need to know what they have to be revising for. We have to do all of the stuff that I talked about before. The kids have to be able to revise on their own a little bit before we ask them to revise with a peer. This is in your freebie, so no need to madly jot it down. But I wanted to share with you the different steps that I take or the procedures that we use for peer revising. This applies for editing too, but since we're just focusing on revising, that's why it says revising. So basically, the first step is 2 kids sit down together. They've both got a piece of writing. They've got a rubric or checklist so that they know what they're looking for. I often like to give them small sticky notes. I'll talk more about why I like that in a second, and then they have pencils. So the first student will then read their work out loud. They don't switch papers. Half the time they can't read each other's writing, and it's not as meaningful unless one child really reads their work aloud and they talk about it. So one child reads their work aloud, they talk about how to make it better. Student A, so the writer, they will mark ideas down. Could be on the rubric, right? Like, I think that's an easy way to do it because they just mark where the kids decided that they were, and that's an immediate reminder of, okay, I need to work on these things, and these things are good. Another thing I like to do is I like to use those small sticky notes that are about, I don't know, like a quarter size of a regular sticky note, maybe less. And what those are nice for is that if there's a missing period or a capital letter or something, I'll have them just write whatever's missing on the sticky note, and they put it immediately on their paper, and then they move on. So the child who's the writer, even if there are tons of things that they want to fix, they don't do it during the conference, because otherwise what happens is student A is sitting there madly erasing, probably ripping the paper. Student B is sitting there doing nothing. And that's not what we want, right? That's not a good use of student B's time. So all of that is to say, that's why I have them quickly mark stuff on the rubric, or, little ideas, if they can write quickly enough, or just missing periods and stuff, go on the sticky notes. They switch roles, so they do the same thing for the other child's piece of writing. And then they go back to their seats, they make changes there, and that's pretty much the whole process. So this is no easy feat for 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds to do, right? It can be pretty challenging. But here are a couple of tips that have helped my kids be a bit more successful with this whole process. I always teach them to start with positive feedback. I'll just use a sentence starter like, okay, so when you're finished talking to your partner, I want you to say one thing you liked. I liked blank. Just kind of tells them what to say. It gets them started in the conversation. And then the other thing too is sentence starters are helpful when you need them to make suggestions politely. So, maybe you could add blank. If you just teach them a couple of these, it goes a really long way in getting their conversations to be productive. And in your freebie, there are a bunch of sentence starters that you can use for this purpose. The other thing that you can do to kind of help the kids with this is you want to give them an example of what a peer conference looks like, right? You can bring in another teacher or adult and you can model it for them. That's really fun to do, but it's also nice if you can show actual kids doing it. So maybe, obviously this year you wouldn't have any from last year probably, but if you started this year, video record your kids and you can show them the following year, as long as you have permission from the parents. Or what you can do this year is you can have 2 kids if they're brave enough. I'm not sure that I would do this with like kinder or early first grade, but maybe later first grade, second grade. You could have them sit in the middle, the other kids sit around them. They have a peer revising conversation and the other kids watch and talk about, what went well. Obviously, you'd want to use some of your higher kids when you do this to set a good example, but that's a good way for them to see a quote unquote, live demonstration of what a peer revising conference can look like and sound like. You can also do this by video recording. My kids, I've even done it with kindergarten. My kids love to be stars on camera, and then I show it to the class so that they can all watch and see what they were doing, what they were working on. That's really helpful too. And then my last tip here for making it work is to designate a specific area in the classroom where kids can go and do this any day during writing workshop. This is something that I do with first and second grade, and I will share more about this at the end. This is the revising and editing table that was super helpful for my kids. I'll also share what I do instead with kinder. Okay, I know I've missed some good questions. Let me see if I can pick a couple up. Let's see. So Deb, Joanne, and Bev were asking about conferring. You ladies can email me. So I have a blog post. I do have one workshop. It's not all about conferring, but we go more in depth on it. I can send you that recording. So definitely feel free to email me and I'd be happy to send you that stuff. Margaret, I love that. How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. It's a good way of putting it for the rubric. Yes, yes. Heather, do you have students have more than one piece of work going on during a unit? So Heather, I don't encourage them. I have them organize their folders. There's a red sticker for the stuff that's finished. There's a green sticker for the stuff that's still going. I encourage them to only be actively working on one, but when they're finished with a piece, they put it into the red side of their folder. So they may not be actively working on it so they don't get confused about all their stories or whatever. But the nice thing there is when you do teach a revising mini lesson, they're always going to have a finished or almost finished piece that they can go back to and work on. So that's why I do it that way. 2 more questions. Eloisa says, so revision strategies are taught throughout and not at the end of the unit, right? Yes, that's just how I do it, Eloisa. We do have like a revising party, so to speak, at the end when we're getting ready to like publish or share our work. So we definitely do talk about it then, but it's kind of throughout, because as I said, the kids are writing different pieces. I want them to not just pick, one thing and they only revise at the end. I want them to understand that it's more than that, right? So that's why I kind of integrate it throughout. And then Cindy says, have you used peer revision early in the fall of first grade? Cindy, early in the fall, probably not so much because I'm really laying those foundations of like, here's what we expect. And, here's how you revise your own work. So later in the fall, winter, sure. But at the very beginning, probably not, Cindy. I don't know if any of you have tackled it that early, but for me, I feel like I would be overwhelmed. The kids might be overwhelmed if I introduced it that early. If your kids have a really good workshop background from kinder, that might do well for you, but I think it just kind of depends on your situation. All right, I know I've missed some questions. I want to keep going because we've got about 15 more minutes and I have much more than that to share, but I will for sure come back to questions later. All right. Now we're going to talk about teaching editing, research-based strategies, and also incorporating grammar and language arts instruction into writing time. So kind of shifting gears, right? Revision was all about the content and editing is about minor changes. We want our kids to fix capitalization mistakes, spelling, punctuation, grammar, right? Minor changes. And I feel like part of the difficulty with editing is with our little ones, we look at their pieces of writing, we see all kinds of errors. Maybe it's a first grade child and there's missing capital letters and periods, but there's also like some subject verb agreement stuff going on. And then there's, they've got dialogue in there, which is awesome, but they don't have quotation marks. And do you want to even address that in first grade? Sometimes it can be really hard to tell, like, what should I focus on when I'm helping a child edit or teaching a child to edit? It's not productive to get them to correct every little thing. You got to decide what's most important. What corrections would this child benefit from? If there's missing capital letters, I don't think there's a point in addressing quotation marks quite yet because that's just not where they're at right now, right? So part of, being able to look at a child's piece of writing and figure out like, okay, what can I teach them or what should I help them with is just knowing what the expectations are. And your curriculum, your standards may be different from these. What I did, if you use the Common Core standards, is I broke these down, right? So I said, okay, what do kindergartners need to be able to edit for in terms of capitalization, punctuation, and spelling? So I kind of broke it down like that for you. This is in your freebie. And something else to keep in mind here is that these are cumulative. So let's say you teach third grade. Third graders need to be able to capitalize words in a title. Fine, but there's a good chance that they might forget holidays, product names, geographic names. That's not something that you necessarily master in 1 year and you're done with, right? You might have to review stuff like this. So with the Common Core, at least, whatever, you're teaching kids to edit for, you've also kind of got to look back and see what the expectations were in the previous grade levels. So then once we know what we want our kids to edit for, how do we teach our kids to edit? How do we get them to master these skills? I don't know about you, but it seems like I make myself blue in the face saying over and over again, capital letters, periods, right? Here's a quote that tells us what not to do when we're teaching kids how to edit. So this says, traditional grammar exercises taught out of context from writing instruction frequently reduce student interest levels, meaning they're boring, and have very little impact on student writing, right? So this is at our, age group. With our age group, this is referring mostly to things like sentence fixing exercises. These are pretty common. I've done them. Maybe many of us have done them. Unfortunately, though, they're not super effective because they don't always lead to students using those skills, those same skills, in their own writing. And that's our ultimate goal. We're not trying to get our kids to become great at doing sentence fixing activities, right? We want them to become great at writing outstanding sentences and correcting any mistakes. And I always tell this little story because these two kiddos just stand out in my mind. I was teaching second grade at the time. I had a little guy and a little gal, and they were struggling with writing. Not content, but it was mostly stuff like, capital letters. They were not capitalizing I consistently in second grade. Capital letter at the beginning of the sentence, periods were missing. So kind of some stuff that I felt was pretty basic. And, I was working with them. Couple of months into the school year, at this time I had been given like a published writing curriculum program to use. And in that program, there were these sentence fixing exercises. And I wasn't doing them because I knew the research. I knew that there was a lot of evidence to show that those aren't super effective. But one day I turned the page and I was like, what the heck, we're going to try this. So I put a sentence fixing exercise on the board, or maybe a couple of them. And the kids recognized it from first grade. They were like, oh yeah, we know this. So my two little guys who were really struggling with writing and editing, their hands go up right away, right? They want to help with this sentence fixing activity. So I'm like, okay. So I intentionally called on them because I was asking myself, like, all right, so if they're having so much trouble with this on their own, like, are they going to be able to find the errors? And the answer was yes. They could tell me exactly what was wrong. They could tell me how to fix stuff. And I was just sitting there and I was like, this is bizarre, because they enjoyed these sentence fixing exercises, which is good, I guess, but they were able to do them successfully, but they couldn't do it at all in their own work. So I think that just goes to show, not for all kids, but for many kids, there's a real disconnect, right, between what those little activities that we're doing with them, sentence fixing, and what they're actually needing to do in their own writing. So now if you use my writing units, you've probably seen that instead of just sentence fixing exercises, if we do fix a sentence, I usually, right beforehand, we will highlight in a couple of sentences things that are correct. So they see the correct way of doing it. They point out stuff that's correct. I show them examples of good writing before I maybe ask them to fix or finish a sentence. So that's how I structure it now. The reason why we want to show kids good examples is because if we're constantly showing them examples of bad writing, they don't know what to strive for, right? What we want to get stuck in their minds is the good stuff, not just bad stuff. And so we want to do things like spend time talking with our kids about how authors use conventions correctly, right? So kindergarten, shared reading. Look, the author put an exclamation point to show that we read with excitement. Can you read this with excitement? Where's the exclamation point? What is that called? So just very simple stuff like that, right? When they get up in, second grade higher, it gets a little bit more complex. But at any stage of the game, we can use text, real books, as the starting point for discussing things like that, right? This author used capital letters correctly. This shows me where the sentence starts. This is how the punctuation helps me as the reader tell us where to pause, right? We don't necessarily have to eliminate all sentence fixing types of activities. Sometimes I still use them, but I don't use them as the basis, right? First, I want to show them good examples, and then maybe we'll fix one. Another thing that makes grammar and teaching editing really meaningful is getting our kids to try it out in their own writing. So rather than just, fixing isolated sentences, we can have them go find places in their own writing where they've used a skill either correctly or incorrectly, and then fix it, right? So in my writing units, if you have them, you already know I build in editing lessons periodically. Again, just like with revising, it's not all chunked at the end. So at the beginning of the school year, or when I was planning those units, what I did was I said, okay, what editing and grammar skills do I need to teach, and what genres would they fit best in? An example of this is using commas in a list. That's a first grade skill with the Common Core standards. A really great genre that this fits with is how-to writing, because the kids can write a list of materials. Here's how you make a PB&J. You will need peanut butter, comma, jelly, comma, bread, comma, a plate, comma, and a knife, right? So that really lends itself to teaching that particular skill of using commas in a list. So then I plan, okay, when we're doing how-to writing, this is a skill that we're going to work on because they can directly apply it to their own work right away. So that said, my grammar and editing instruction is done primarily during writing workshop time. It's not to say that that's the only time it happens, because I do like to supplement here and there, a little morning work. Maybe I'll have a devoted lesson just on grammar if it's something that I need to reinforce. But I keep most of it in writing workshop because I want them to be able to apply it immediately, right? To see the connection between reading and writing. So now I'm going to walk you real quick through an example of an editing lesson that teaches kids about using question marks in the context of real books and real writing. This outline is in your freebie, so no need to write it down. But basically, the different parts that I include are I choose a book that we've read already, one that they're familiar with. The second thing I do is I point out how the author uses a convention, capitalization, punctuation, whatever, in the text. We'll talk about why the author uses it, what effect it has on us as the reader, right? And then I ask the kids to try it out in their own writing. So those are the different steps that I use to get kids, A, to see it in real books, and B, to use it in their own writing. So let's say that we're working on question marks, right? So I've read them this book. We're in a nonfiction writing unit. I've read them this book about jellyfish at another time of the day or earlier in the day, whatever. And so I bring it back and I say, okay, boys and girls, we read this book about jellyfish. I want to show you something that I noticed in this book. In this book, I noticed that the author included headings, right? You know what a heading is. We've talked about that before. And in the headings, there are question marks, right? Point those out. So sometimes authors use questions to organize their books. They imagine what the reader might wonder about the topic. They put a question here that the reader might be thinking, and then they answer it below, right? So we'd go over a couple examples. I'd show them where the question marks are. I'd have them help me point them out. And then I would say, okay, now I want you to go back to your folder and find a nonfiction book that's finished or almost finished. And then what I'd like you to do is I would like you to write headings just like this. I want you to think, what would the reader want to know? And try to write some headings with question marks. Try out those question marks. So something along those lines. Basically, however you do it, whatever you're teaching, you show them in a real book, and then they try it out in their own writing. So speaking of best practices in teaching editing, this is one of them, keeping it contextualized. Some other ones are to model, think aloud, really similar to revising. Again, use rubrics and checklists, teach spelling strategies, teach the kids how to peer edit. So pretty much the same stuff works for revising and editing. Here's a really simple, fun tool that you're going to get in your freebie. This is great for giving kids positive feedback on their correct use of writing conventions. Like I said, I always feel like a broken record, like just tape record me and play it over and over again saying, don't forget to check your capital letters, don't forget to check your periods, right? So what I like to do instead, and I still sound like a broken record, but this helps a little bit, is I want to recognize kids when they are doing a good job with capital letters, punctuation marks, and all that stuff. So what I have for you in your freebie are these conventions cards, right? Capital letters, spelling, punctuation. There might be another one that I don't remember. But at the beginning of the year, I'll just make copies of these on colored paper, right? I will keep them in a stack so they're handy about once a week. I tell the kids what they are and I make it a really big fun deal. But then once a week, I'll take a stack of these cards. I'll just walk around the room while they're writing. I'm not saying anything. I'm looking for kids that are doing a good job with their conventions. So just the fact that they see me with these cards kind of makes them like scramble to like fix things up, right? They're like, oh, I want a card. So I'm walking around, I see a child who's doing a great job with their capital letters. So I just silently put the card on their desk, give them a thumbs up, and then keep on going. The other kids at that child's table are going to see, oh my gosh, he got a cool capitals card. I want one too. They go back to their writing and they start fixing. So not only did I recognize the child who is doing well, but I also kind of, in a kind way, encouraged the other kids, motivated them to clean up their work. So this is just a very fun, simple thing. It only takes, you make copies of them, just keep them on hand. It only takes a few minutes to implement. These are in your freebie if you'd like to try these. Another thing that's in your freebie that makes editing just a bit more fun is the COPS Flip book. And COPS here stands for capitalization, organization, organization more like neat handwriting and spaces between words and paragraphing, not so much organization of content because that's really revising. But we got capitalization, organization, punctuation, spelling. And underneath these flaps, if you're like a kindergarten teacher, you might want to just write or make pictures for the kids. If you teach first or second, your kids might be able to write their own stuff underneath. But basically okay, capitalization. You teach them how to capitalize I, and they write it here underneath the flap. You're going to see it here. It goes underneath. They write that. And then later you teach them capitalize I. So they write that or you write that underneath. So you've got kind of a running list of things that they've got to edit for. And so the purpose of this book not only is just to create this list of reminders, but what the kids do is every time they edit, they don't necessarily use this. It's kind of more like a special thing. Like when we're getting ready to publish, I give them their books and they love to use them. So it's extra special. But basically, I hand them their little books that are already, finished or almost finished. They take their own piece of writing, or it could be a partner's that they're helping with. They look under the first flap, capitalization. Okay, what do I need to edit or what do I need to look for? They read through their whole piece of writing, only looking for capitalization strategies. Okay, then they open up the organization tab, right? Under that is neat handwriting, spaces, whatever. They read through their writing looking for organization mistakes. Then they do the same thing for punctuation and spelling. So basically what you've accomplished is the child is reading their own work 4 times, and each time they're only looking for one type of error. This, even as an adult writer, I don't have a COPS flip book for myself, but when I'm editing stuff that I make for you guys or whatever, what I try to do is I will read only looking for a certain type of error or a certain thing that I've forgotten, and then I'll read it again and only look for something else. And this helps me focus on finding just one type of mistake. And it does the same thing for kids, right? If you treat this as something special, they'll get excited about it. They're going to read their own writing 4 times. They're having fun. You've helped them focus on only one thing at a time. And it's just a great way to help them see their own mistakes a little bit more easily. In the freebie, there's the directions for making it. I like to pre-cut the flaps. Maybe if your kids are older, they can do it, but I just like to do it myself so it looks nicer. All these printable pieces are in your handout. Trying to look at time here. I think I'm going to skip questions for now because I want to get to the giveaway for sure. We got just a teeny bit more to go. So definitely I'll get back to those questions as soon as we're done with this. But I do want to talk about making revising and editing part of your daily routine, right? It can't just be like I said, we're publishing, we do a lesson or two on revising and editing. We've got to kind of make it a part of everyday writing. I already touched on this briefly, but I mentioned that I plan and integrate specific lessons on revising and editing throughout my writing units. I talked about making them relevant. So, with my example of commas in a list, that goes in a how to writing unit. I really want to make it relevant to what the kids are writing so that they can try it out right then and there in their own pieces. Another thing I do is that I want my kids to understand that writers are constantly revising and editing their work. So whether I'm doing, a reading response thing or writing instruction, of course, science, social studies, I model how I make my writing better. And I think aloud while I'm doing it so that the kids know why I'm making those changes. I'm writing something for science. I'm like, this would sound better if I said this. I say that to them. I change it. I'm just showing them all the time. Takes time for kids to really master this, but if you're just showing them all the time, you're modeling the fact that writers are always making changes to their work. That goes a long way. And then this is what I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. Kindergarten teachers, bear with me for a second. I have not tried this in kindergarten. We do something a little different, which I'll explain in a minute. But first and second grade teachers, if you have kids who are like, I'm done, and you're like, did you look over your work? And they say, oh yeah, I did. This is a total game changer, or at least it has been for me. So I was having this issue where the kids would say they're done. They looked over their work. There were tons of mistakes in there. And I don't know, I was thinking about this, maybe doing some reading. And what I did to try to get around this problem was I designated a table in our room. And during writing time, that table became the revising and editing table. So kids would get up, physically go to that table, work with a partner, and I'll talk more about this in a second. They would work on making their piece of writing better. What I found was that physically getting up and going to a different place in the classroom got the kids in a totally different mindset. They liked going to the table. They like working with a partner. It's fun. And for whatever reason, those same kids that were sitting there saying they're done, they were able to find and fix mistakes once I implemented that practice of using the revising and editing table. So this is what, this was from the second grade year when I was teaching in the classroom. Any table will work. This was, I think I had a teacher push in maybe and do guided reading with me during guided reading time. This was my guided math table. So it wasn't just during writing workshop. This was just the revising and editing table. I'm sorry. It was just during writing workshop that it was the revising and editing table. You can use whatever table you choose to be something totally different at other times of the day. It's helpful if you put it near a wall. I had this sort of chart. It did not stay up here all the time because it's very tall and heavy. But this particular year, I just didn't have room to put it near the wall. I have the steps that they're supposed to do written out here for them. It's helpful to have visuals and reminders posted by it. It's also helpful if you just have a little bin and you make a child responsible for putting the bin on the table. And in that bin, you can put rubrics for the genre that the kids have been working on. You can put those little sticky notes that I was talking about in there, and you can put, like, if you do special, editing or revising utensils, you can put those in there too. The bin just goes on the table and then they're good to go. This is in your freebie, so no need to write it down. This is what the kids do at the table. In the workshop model, they're all working at their own pace, so they're not all finishing at once, right? when a child is ready to revise and edit, they know that because they're finished with the piece, right? They don't just stick it in their folder and that's it. They now go to the revising and editing table. They work by themselves until someone else arrives. Then they do this whole process that I talked about earlier, where they read their work aloud, they mark things down on the rubric, a couple of things on sticky notes, they're giving positive feedback to their partner. Both the kids get a chance to read their work and get feedback. Again, as I said before, they're not writing on each other's papers. I'm big on respecting the writer and allowing the writer to make changes. They don't make those changes while they're at the table, because then they would end up, hogging the table and the other kids wouldn't get a chance to really go there. So what they do is they talk about the changes they want to make, and then they go back to their seat. That's when they make the changes to their writing on their own. So if you want to try this out, I would recommend setting it up early in the school year, but not too early. Like I said, when I was going back to that idea of somebody had asked, how early in the fall, or would you do it early in the fall in first grade? And my answer is probably not immediately, because you want to give kids an understanding of what it means to revise and edit before they can really do it with a partner. They need to be able to do it on their own, right? So we've got to have writing workshop procedures and routines down. We've got to know what it means to edit and revise, have some practice, and then I introduce it. I mentioned for kinder, I have not tried this. If you do teach kinder and you feel like your kids maybe are ready at the end of the year, try it and let me know how it goes. But with kinder, typically what I do is I will designate maybe halfway through the unit, but usually just my kinder units are a little bit shorter. Usually at the end of the unit, there'll be a day where I have them pair up and work on very basic, revising and editing with a partner. It's really structured, but I've found that with first and second graders, they can, they're responsible enough to go over and get help fixing a piece of writing. And this table can kind of eventually more or less run itself. But with kinders, I just feel like it goes best for me when I designate, okay, now we're all going to work with a partner. And we still basically follow the same procedure. It's just a little bit more structured than, having them go to the table whenever they feel they're ready. When you do introduce the table, you want it to run itself, so to speak, as I said. But the first week when I introduce it, I make it a big deal. It's fun. The kids are going to want to come sit at the table and try it. So I sit myself at the table for the first week or so. During that first week, I'm not, really doing conferences or anything. I sit there so that I can model, so that I can help them, and just give them the support that they need to be successful on down the road. Following that first week, I typically don't sit at the table unless I notice that they're having a lot of problems. The point is basically for the kids to be able to finish a piece of writing and not come to me and be like, I'm done. I want them to be able to get help revising and editing their work without necessarily needing my direct support. This is something that I do have to model repeatedly, especially after like a long break or when the kids forget to follow procedures. If it's just not going well and I feel like they're goofing off, I will close the table. That's very disappointing to them, but sometimes, they just need the reminder. We need to review what proper behavior is at the table or how we use it appropriately. So I will close it if it's not going well. Just like I mentioned with revising conversations, same thing goes for the interactions that the kids have at the revising and editing table. Try having other kids watch, 2 kids who are super proficient, or you can videotape kids who are doing really well and then, show it to the rest of the class and talk about what went well. I'm going to skip questions because it's time for a giveaway. So I'm super excited about this giveaway because normally when I do a giveaway, I share one resource with the winners, right? But tonight I have 3. We've talked about a ton of stuff tonight, right? I know it was a lot of information. We talked about teaching. We talked about Common Core. We talked about how the writing process isn't necessarily straightforward, like straight steps. We talked about some different revising strategies, editing strategies. It was a lot, right? So I do have these resources that can provide you some support with all of this. The giveaway winners, if you are a winner, when I pull the names in a second, you're going to get to choose a writing bundle. You're going to get the revising and editing toolkit, and you're going to get these like interactive board complement the author activities. So let me share a little bit more about what each of these things are and how they're different. This is going to provide you the most support in teaching writing and revising and editing. This is going to provide medium support. It's like some supplement stuff with getting kids to revise and edit. And then these are just some little activities that you can use to show kids really good strategies that real authors use when they're writing. So let's talk a little bit about the K2 writing units. For each grade level, I've got narrative, informational, opinion writing units, and the genre is spirals. So typically, not kindergarten a little bit, but first and second, kindergarten, yes, a little bit, but first and second grade for sure as well. They spiral. So you're not just visiting a genre once, you're visiting it typically twice. So like with kinder, you do personal narratives, and that's narrative writing, and then you come back and you write some stories. So you revisit it again. If you have maybe like a curriculum map or a certain order that you're supposed to follow, you can still use the units. Because they spiral, you don't have to teach Unit 2 second. You don't have to teach Unit 5 fifth. But you want to teach Unit 2 before you teach Unit 5 because these are both narrative writing and they build on each other. You can mix up these genres other than that. These have got complete lessons. Everything's written out for you. They guide you through using mentor text. Not every lesson, but typically there's one mentor text suggested per unit. You can swap them out with your own if you already have some that you love. They're not used in every lesson for sure. And then the other nice thing about these is if you have a sub or it's unexpected. I had an incident once where I twisted my ankle and did not realize how bad it was till the middle of the night. Had to go into school after not sleeping all night. And then because I didn't have, complete plans written out, so I kind of learned my lesson there. It's nice to have these. Somebody else can pick it up, teach it. If you ever go on maternity leave or have an extended leave of absence, a lot of teachers have said that the way these are written out is great for that. It just makes life a little bit easier. Like I mentioned earlier, the units do address those concepts like correct spelling, grammar, punctuation, capitalization. They're integrated into the unit. And then the first and second grade units also have these daily grammar activities. They're totally optional. But if you want to reinforce what you're teaching in the units, maybe in the morning, there's 2 sentences where they find the correct capital letters or the correct periods, and then maybe they have to fix or complete a sentence too. In these units, the purpose is so that you're not having to go on Pinterest, search for stuff, just pull things together. The intent is that pretty much everything you should need is included. Visuals, student rubrics, rubrics for yourself to use. It's all designed to be in one place. So that's the K first and second grade writing units are the most comprehensive resource of these 3. The second one I have is the Revising and Editing Toolkit, and this is for kinder first and second. So the reason why I put them together is because I wanted you to have a range. Maybe if you're a second grade teacher, you have some kids that are at a kinder level when it comes to editing. Or maybe if you're a kinder teacher, you have a couple of advanced kids that would benefit from, more advanced materials. So that's why they're all together. Kids are really on a spectrum with all these skills I've found. If you have my writing units, you do not need this stuff. It's just if you feel, hey, my kids really do need to work on revising and editing, then these are supplementary materials. And so in these supplementary materials, there are things like strategy cards. This is a full-size page, and I've got smaller little cards that the kids can actually keep in their folders or on a binder ring. You're teaching them how to add specific examples. This is a revising strategy. They have an example, you post it, you teach it, or they get to keep a little card too. And then I talked about the leveled rubrics and checklists and how that can be valuable in differentiating for kids' needs, not overwhelming them, but challenging them enough. So there's like 50 rubrics and checklists for you to choose from. They are organized, so it's not, overwhelming or anything. But you can give kids more difficult levels as they progress in their writing. All you got to do is print it out, show them how to use it, and then you're good to go. My writing units, by the way, do have rubrics and checklists, but there's more like one per unit that everybody does. And if you feel like you need to differentiate more, this is a bit more flexible. The other thing I talked about earlier was getting mentor texts ready for your kids so that you can model revising and editing skills. So in the revising and editing toolkit, there already are a ton of mentor texts created for you. Some of them are correct and good, and some of them intentionally have mistakes in them so that you can model how to fix things and make them better without always having to write, your own mentor text. Last thing, real quick, is this is something different. And what the Complement the Author package is designed to be is just these quick, like in context practice activities for kids to identify where the author, me, has correctly used, capital letters, punctuation marks, stuff like that. So these are for the interactive whiteboard. And you get a passage, and then the kids can move these stars around. So you read them the passage, say, okay, maybe you talk about it a little bit. Now I want you to find places where the author has used a question mark at the end of the sentence. So they move these little stars, they can be physically manipulated, and they help you find them. And then you talk about maybe, they're using their question marks in their own writing. And then some of the passages in here were written to focus on parts of speech, like this one is verbs. The kids, again, you read it to them or they read it with you. You drag and drop these little zigzags to find the verbs or the nouns or whatever. It's just, these are designed to be quick. You just put them up there. They practice finding things done correctly. So they're seeing good examples and they really don't take very long to do. So let's do the giveaway. What I'm going to do is I'm going to pull up the list of everybody who signed up. And I know not everybody was able to make it tonight. So what I'm going to do is I will call names and email addresses and just listen for your name. If you don't hear your name, don't type anything in the chat box. But if you do hear your name, I'd like you to just say, I'm here in the chat box, only if you hear your name. So then if you do hear your name and you let me know that you're here, you're going to need to email me and let me know if you would like Kinder First or Second Grade bundle. And then these are for K2, so these are good to go. So you will need to email me and let me know which grade level bundle you would like if you are a winner. All right, my first winner is Lucy Rodriguez, LLR_87301 at yahoo.com. Lucy, if you're here, just say I'm here in the chat box. Patricia.turner at fcsd.grsc.k12.ar.us. That's a long email. Patricia, if you're here, let me know. Jody, jhorner at mcwildcats.org. Jody, if you are here, let me know. Christine, C.Scharf at jfk.edu.mx. Christine, if you're here, let me know. Patricia's here. Woohoo. All right, Patricia, go ahead and email me after we're done here and let me know which grade level you want. Martina Ramirez1 at gmail.com. Lucy's here too. All right. I'm going to try to see if we can maybe get one more winner. Brandy, sjjceschool at gmail.com. Brandy, if you're here, let me know. Lisa, LSABIA at aacps.org. Gonna call just a couple more names. Anne, grade 3-4 at dmschool.com. And if you're here, let me know, and I'm gonna call one more name. Elaine, am happy, I like that, at live.com. All right, well, congrats to our winners. Remember to email me if you did hear your name. If you did not win, I do have a sale for you. So what I did, I'll put up the link here. In my TPT store, which is where these are, I put all of the resources that have to do with writing, revising and editing, and the Complement the Author pack. I put these all on sale. The sale is running through Friday, so 2 days from now at midnight Eastern time. It's set up to automatically turn off. So if you do want to get one of these, I would suggest doing it before Friday so that you don't miss that sale. I will email out that link, so not to worry if you didn't grab it now, but I do want to put up the freebie, and then I will stick around and answer some questions. So if you do have to leave, first of all, if the freebie link doesn't work, no worries. I do email it to you. You will get, let's see, slides. You will get freebie. You will get a certificate if you attended live. You will get the recording, as long as everything recorded correctly. If you don't get anything from me by like tomorrow night, just write me and let me know. But that should all be coming to you. And now I'm going to try to answer as many questions as I can. If you do have to leave us, thank you so much for being here. If you can stick around, please do. And please retype your question if you asked it a while ago and I missed it, because sometimes they get pushed down and I can't get back to them. Okay, so Jennifer says, my school does not have the smartboard. Can you use it if you do not have this piece of technology? Jennifer, you can. It's just so Jennifer's talking about the Complement the Author. And you can, Jennifer, it just is a little bit trickier. I don't know if you have a projector or anything where, if you have a projector where the kids can see what's on your computer screen, they can come up to the computer and physically move, the stars or the little zigzags or whatever that I was showing you. The kids can also, I don't know how old your kids are, Jennifer, but they can do it as an independent activity. If you teach them how, they can open this up in Google Drive, or you can set it up for them and then they can do it that way. Ideally it's for the smartboard, but you can kind of work around it if this is something that you feel would be really beneficial, Jennifer. If you let me know what kind of technology you do have, that might help. So Yolanda, there should be a button that shows up. I don't know if it shows up if you're on your phone. Let me put up the freebie link one more time. It should just pop up on your screen, I think. Eloise said, good. I'm glad. She says, I feel more motivated to teach revising and editing. Awesome. Yeah, I hope you guys and gals, mostly gals, I think, can use these, not all right now because it's kind of the beginning of the year for a lot of us, but as the year goes on, save this stuff, come back to it, introduce it as your kids are ready for them. Bev, thank you. I'm so glad this was helpful. Christina, can you purchase the units and rubrics? Yes. So Christina, these units, you can get them individually if you want. You can get them as the bundle. The bundle is the least expensive option as opposed to buying them individually. These do have rubrics, Christina. The leveled rubrics and checklists are in the revising and editing toolkit, and I'll put that link up again. Okie dokie. Kat says she likes the Complement the Author cards. Oh, the conventions cards. Awesome. Let's see. Susan, thank you. I appreciate that. I'm glad you enjoyed it. Okay, so Joanne says, some of my kids can barely draw or know many letters or sounds. How do I do writer's workshop with them successfully when they just scribble? So that's a great question. Joanne, Joanne, if you're curious, look at the kindergarten version of my writing workshop bundles. Even if you have a program or whatever, at least look at the preview, because the preview will have a list of the lessons that I use at the beginning of the year, and it'll kind of show you. But basically, at the beginning of the year, I do a lot of drawing instruction. Here's how you add more features to a person's face. Here's how you draw with more than one color, because a lot of them will just take the color purple and scribble or color with just purple. Here's how you, add more details to the background. So those lessons, Joanne, are really helpful because even though it's drawing instruction, it's teaching the kids to add details, think about their ideas, get them on paper. While I'm teaching this, Joanne, I'm also teaching them how to stretch out words, write the sounds they hear. Eventually we get to the point where they are labeling, they draw a tree and they write tree. It might just be the letters T and E, but they're labeling using invented spelling. And then we go from there with sentences and all that good stuff. Oh, so Cindy, the certificate is actually separate. That will be emailed out to you. If you don't get it, Cindy, by tomorrow night, go ahead and email me. Susan, awesome. Good, good. Okay, so Mallory says, how quickly should you introduce the different strips of the rubric for a very low second grade? Should I focus on one until it's mastered? So Mallory, if your students are pretty low, yeah. I mean, and this is like the first time you're using rubrics, just focus on one. The only thing I would say is don't focus on it to the point where you wait until all the kids have completely mastered it. What I would do, Mallory, is I would wait until, you've modeled it and the kids have tried it out. I would say if like 50 to 75% of your kids can do it, then you're ready to move on to the next one. Because what I found is if I wait for like everybody to totally master it, then we never move on, right? Kids will get things and pick things up later. If a lot of your class has got it, then move on to the next strip and just keep on going that way. Just kind of feel it out, I'd say. Okay, so Jennifer says, I have a student computer, 2 iPads, and my teacher computer that can project onto a TV screen. Okay, so Jennifer, with this, then yeah, so you can just have your teacher computer and, show the kids on the projector where stuff is. They can come up to your computer, use the mouse or whatever to move like these little stars to the spot. They're just not going to be able to move it on the board, but it's kind of the same effect. Okay, Corinne, good question. Do you give the rubrics out in the beginning of the unit or do you wait until the revising, editing part of the unit? That's great. So Corinne, kind of depends on the grade level. With kinder, I don't give them too early on, but Corinne, with first and second grade, the way I structure these units is that there's like at least 2 sections. And in the first section, we're working in the genre. We are doing one writing project, and it's not that there's only like one final writing project. There's one halfway through, and then there's one at the end. So when we get to that first writing project and we're kind of finishing up and we're getting there, that's typically when I introduce the rubric. Because at that point, I've taught most of the foundational skills. I wouldn't necessarily want to hand them a rubric in a genre that we're tackling for the first time if they haven't been taught those skills. I don't know if I'm making sense, but what I'm trying to say is I don't want to hand it to them at the very beginning because I haven't taught them all the skills they need to be successful. At the same time, I don't want to wait till the very end because kids can really benefit from having the rubric to work with. So I would say about like a third of the way through or half of the way through, when I've taught most of the basic skills, that's when I get them working with the rubric. You can have on hand for that first part of the unit just a very basic like editing checklist. There's some in here where it's just things that kids can look for at the revising and editing table without it being too specific to the genre that you're teaching. That was a lot. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, Christina says, with comps, what do you recommend for students who cannot look for capitalization errors because they are missing punctuation? That is also a really good question. So, I guess, Christina, if you're having this issue with a lot of your kids, you can have them work backwards, right? So maybe instead of doing COPS, they start with S and then they go P and they try to find some punctuation and then they get to capitalization eventually, right? It can be kind of hard because if your kids are just going on and they don't have a concept of a sentence, then it gets a little bit tricky. Just kind of use your judgment. The COPS editing flipbook is not something that I use like super early in kinder. If you teach kinder, just kind of feel out your kids and if you think it would truly be beneficial for them. Lucy's asking about live workshops in different cities. So Lucy, honestly, I've been so busy lately that I have not done a lot of live presenting. I do occasionally. My schedule makes it a little bit hard. It's a lot easier for me to sit down here with you guys and do it remotely, but sometimes I do present, yeah, in person. Okay, so June, how long do you spend on a unit? Depends. With these units, the kindergarten ones are shorter. With first and second grade, it can go a month. There's typically more lessons in here than you may need to teach. I wanted to give you, like a variety, right? Maybe your kids are really high and you can get to the higher stuff. Or maybe your kids are lower and you do the first part of the unit and that's all you get to. It's kind of flexible that way. But I would say, generally speaking, like a month is how long we spend on average. How many pieces of writing in that genre? Again, it varies on the grade level, June, but with kinder, a lot, because they're writing those really short books. With second grade, maybe they're finishing a piece every like 3 days or so. So if it's like 20, obviously I don't have a number that I can rattle off because some kids are slower writers than others. And I don't want to give them this fake benchmark of you have to do this many books. I just kind of try to monitor kids and look at their folders. But let's say in second grade, a child's finishing a book every 3 days. So over a course of like 20, 21 days of instruction, they're writing like 7, maybe 8 books, if that helps. Joanne, I will definitely email you. I really enjoy doing these. I do workshops relatively frequently. And so definitely I will email you guys and let you know when I have future ones planned for sure. All right. Well, we have gone pretty long. So thanks for hanging around. I appreciate you coming. I hope that you got some ideas to take away. Remember, you can just try one thing tomorrow or try one thing next week, and you can save this stuff for later on in the school year. If you're feeling overwhelmed, just pick one thing that you want to focus on. You can come back to this stuff. You've got the freebie, or you're going to get the freebie in the email. If you don't have it, you're going to get the slides. Just save this stuff, come back to it. It's stuff that you can use throughout the year, I hope. Thank you again so much for being here. If you have any questions that I missed, I apologize. Just email me. All you have to do is respond to those reminder emails and I will get back to you. Look for the email with the recording tomorrow, and then some links should be coming out tonight. And I will talk to you guys soon.